Now let's take a look at some fabric that's been woven, and I'm hoping you can see that these basically are both the same warp, rainbow color, and what we did here was wove with a pale gray, not a real dark gray, a lighter gray. Now you can see on the one, we have, here's a yellow and here's yellow and orange and orange. They look a little bit different because when this was woven, like I said, weave structure does affect how the color looks. This is a little softer, and to me this shows up some of the color a little bit more. I also mentioned about putting a darker color in between. Well, you can see here the darker color, you can see it, and these really pop, but in between these, and even on the tabby, they're not as noticeable. So again, little tricks by adding a dark shade or a lighter shade, or if you wanted everything to blend together, you can see how these kind of blend together. So again, playing around with weave structure does affect your color outcome. Again, one of the things I often do is to use different shades of gray, especially when I have a lot of colors in the warp. It seems to be a color that kind of works pretty well, but be careful. Some grays are blue and some are green. So that's one example. Now this might be another one that might be a little hard to see, but let me put this on the table. And you can see that I have basically 3 different scarves. They were all woven on the same warp. It's a hand-dyed warp. The warp was actually this color, this kind of a yellowy green. What I did on this one was I wove with that yellow green, but again, it was hand-dyed, so you're gonna see some brown. And on this one, I wove with a nice Kelly green, and then what I did with this was I wove with a bamboo, kind of a gold color. And each one, as I wove, I had something a little bit different in shading. And in that way, I have 3 different products from one warp. So that's one idea that you could do. And here's another one. It might be, again, I'm hoping you can see it. Some of these are a little harder to see than others on camera. Now we have 3 different, there are 3 different ones, but guess what? They were all done on the same warp. And look how different they are. This one is the plain or the tabby weave. This one, these 2 are both woven with a shade of gray. There's a little bit darker gray, and it was also a thin yarn. Sometimes in your warp, if you have a thick yarn and then you weave with a thinner yarn, all the yarn in the warp will show up a little bit better. If you use a thicker yarn or maybe one the same, the colors might not pop as much. Now this is a twill and a little bit thicker yarn and a lighter gray, and then this one was a lot lighter. You can see how different it is. To me, the lighter color washes out the color. So again, another thing I often suggest to people when they're weaving, that they not use a white when they have a really pretty warp like this. It tends to take some of all those pretty colors out. Again, that's just my opinion on that. So there's another example, and let's see if we have a couple more here. Here we go. Let's get this the right way. Okay, this is a table runner that was striped, as you can see, and then I did a set of placemats and I wove with gray. So you can see the difference, gray and the black. A big difference. This one really pops. It's a lot brighter. This is softer. Again, these were both neutral colors that I wove with. Let's take a look at another one. I have another set of placemats. Same warp. However, this one was the tabby. This was a twill. This one seems to show up more of the blue. This one is covering up some of the warp. So you don't see these stripes as much. If you want something softer for the pattern, this works. And you can see it's a different shade of blue. This almost is a little brighter on the edges. This one kind of washes off some of the side. I think the blue that I wove with was just a little shade lighter. So again, playing around, even with the pattern, you can see how things look a lot different. And one more of this type of fabric. or the cotton. Those were all cotton. This is something I just did. Just took off the loom, and I had a few extra pieces. This was a warp that was gray with a little bit of black as hand dyed, and then what I wove with was black. But I thought, let me try something else. So I decided to weave with a gray blue. So this was a gray blue, but what I find interesting is on one side, it looks a little different than the other. The color's about the same. What I decided though was all that nice hand dyeing that I did and all the texture, even on this side, is a little bit different. I decided, you know what? I really am not fond of this particular color. I really like the richer shade of what the black did to the fabric. So those are a couple of examples of what happens when you use different color yarn. Now you're getting ready to start putting something on your loom. What are you going to do? You want to make something usable. At least I would like to do that. So when I started weaving, and I suggested what you might be able to do is start to do some practice and do lots of weaving. What can you make? Perhaps you could do some placemats. What's wrong with having everyone in your household having a different color and a different weave structure? You could put on a warp, maybe one color, and weave with different colors, or even change the treadling. And then when you're done, cut them off, and you have different placemats, and you can use them. If you don't want to put on such a wide warp, why not doing coasters? That's another great way. You can use some thick yarn, put a long warp on, or not too long, maybe even 3 yards or 2 yards, and start weaving different colors. You'll have all different coasters to use around the house or to give gifts away. Another idea would be for the cowl, like what I'm wearing. If you have some yarn, maybe you have sheep and you have a lot of really soft wool, put on a warp and weave different colors. You could also put different colors in the warp to begin with, which is another great way. I mean, I know I talked about getting one of these samplers. You can do that. It's a good idea. But if you want to use what you already have, go ahead and put all the different colors in and then weave with different colors. Suggest weaving with white and see what happens, with gray and with black. And you'll see there's quite a bit of difference when you go from white to black. White to me is kind of a soft color, kind of washes out some things, and I'll show you that in a sample if I haven't done it already. And if I use a gray, kind of makes all the colors softer, and the black, it's even more different than the others. So you can do things like that. Or perhaps you're someone who just is not too happy yet with your selvages, and you do sew. You could just do some yardage. Again, it doesn't have to be wide yardage, like 36 inches. It can be something even 12 inches. Weave all different colors and treadle different patterns, cut it up, and make little bags with it, little tote bags, or maybe little coin purses, or perhaps even something for your eyeglasses. You can do all kinds of things with that fabric. Using the fabric or using the yarn you have accessible is also a good idea, because you're going to see that some yarn does act differently than others. Again, let's just do some practice. You could also, if you are doing something, you could put on an extra yard or two and do some practice with that. I often do that still, especially when I do have a hand-dyed warp or I'm putting some colors together. I'm not too sure. I have an idea, but I'm not quite sure if I'm going to like it or not. So then I add a little extra and I play around with the first couple of, maybe the first couple of inches or even a little bit more than that. Sometimes you have to weave more than an inch to get an idea of what it's actually going to look like. All right, that's all for that segment. We're going to move on to the next section. Now, what if you purchase some really pretty yarn and it first comes like this, maybe in a skein of some type, or maybe even a warp, and you're wondering, oh my, what's going to happen? Well, if it's in a skein like this, you could rewind it and get a better sense of what colors you have. So here we have this yarn, and now you're thinking, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? What am I going to weave with this? Well, looking at this, for me, I have two choices. I could pick this kind of bronzy color in here, or maybe the purple. I decided to do the purple. Let's put all of these together. So that's what I would do. I would put the purple with this and weave with it. So this would be my warp and this would be my weft. That's my suggestion on that one. Now I showed you something else earlier. I showed you this warp and you might wonder, what am I going to weave with this one? Well, to be honest, I'm still trying to figure out what color I want to do. But I believe I am going to use a neutral shade, maybe a little bit darker than this neutral. Because if I do weave it with a neutral, remember, this is all going to be kind of pale. If I really want to pop it, I might weave with a pink or maybe a lighter shade of pink and kind of bring all of those things out. So when you get something like that, sometimes you might have to consider, what am I going to weave with, and not be too afraid of what the outcome might be. And now here's one more. Let's say you got another warp or skeins of yarn. And again, you're trying to figure out, what am I going to do? What am I going to weave with this? Well, again, you can see there's some gray in there. And that was the one. But if you redo it and reskein it, I see a lot of the blue also in there, a lot of the blue. So what I decided, I'm going to weave with blue. Now with this one, you could also maybe do a gray, a light gray color if you want. And if you did a black, it might kind of be too much for it. But those are just some suggestions. If you happen to get some warp or you get some skeins of yarn and you're not quite sure as to what to do with the weaving part or the weft. Thank you for watching. I hope you found that helpful. Basically, are just some things that are off the top of my head, some things I've done over the years, and I know there are many other ideas out there. You can go ahead and take classes and study and do whatever you'd like to do. However, I suggest really practice, practice, practice. And also, you can get one of these samples and samplers and go ahead and see what happens when yarns interact. Enjoy your day. Thank you again.